I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Lori Ann Wood. Lori lives with her husband in an empty nest in beautiful Bentonville, Arkansas. Having discovered a serious heart condition almost too late, Lori Ann writes to encourage others to explore their difficult faith questions along the detours of life. Lori Ann's award-winning book released in February 2023 with CrossRiver Media, Divine Detour, the path you'd never choose can lead you to the faith you've always wanted. Read more from her at loriannwood.com. Welcome to the show, Lori.
Oh, hi, Kara. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm so glad you reached out to come on the show, and I'm very excited to hear more about your story.
Yes, this is just so great because I don't get to talk a lot about books that I read, so I'm loving this.
Yeah, and that was kind of my premise behind starting the show is I'm not a big TV watcher by nature, and I read all the time. So to me, authors are my celebrities, and I'm like, well, I would love to know what my favorite authors are reading. Like, I want to know what you guys are reading, who are writing for us. So, well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Yes, well, I have 3 grown children, and I just recently had a grandbaby, so I'm a brand new grandma.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's everything everyone says it is. And it's even more than that, but we'll get into more as we go, but it's wonderful. I didn't start out to be a writer. I'm actually a CPA. I went to business college. I taught college accounting for about 25 years.
Wow.
And I had just a big health moment about 8 years ago that really changed everything and sort of reordered my life. And so since then, I've just been on this other trajectory.
Yeah. I can imagine, how that would just stop you in your tracks and you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Where am I going?
Yes, that's exactly what happened because I'm just kind of a healthy person. I have low blood pressure and low cholesterol, and I was humming along fine. I had kids at home at that time, and the shortened version of the story is I was just suddenly diagnosed with end-stage heart failure.
Wow.
And it was something that really knocked my feet out from under me because I don't have any family history and I had no risk factors. Wow. And to top it off, 3 weeks before I got that diagnosis, I had a medical evaluation for a life insurance policy. And they said, you're so healthy, you have less than 3% chance of ever developing heart disease in your lifetime.
Wow. I have the chills right now.
Yeah, right. And I wasn't very surprised about that because I thought I'm not really worried about heart disease, cancer and car accidents. And so that really set me on a different course, as I was saying, and really made me examine life from a whole different lens. I couldn't teach anymore because I just didn't have the breath support and the stamina to lecture for hours at a time. And so I found that I could sit and type almost all day long. And so, like so many people, I think I felt like I had a book inside me most of my life, but I think I was waiting to be an expert in something. And I just never felt like I was an expert. And so once I got that diagnosis and my life sort of tipped on its head, I started just writing and, took the time to write a book that I would not have taken in a safer, healthier life. So that's kind of my story and how I got to be where I'm at right now.
So you had no symptoms leading up to this diagnosis?
Well, that's a tricky one because I actually did have symptoms, and I was trained at Mayo Clinic to be a community educator for Women Heart, which is a patient support network for women at risk of heart disease. And during that training, I started learning about these symptoms and looking back over 10, even 15 years before my diagnosis. And I realized that I had symptoms, but I didn't realize they were heart related.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, they just seemed so benign. They were, and they masquerade as so many other things. And individually, they just seem like nothing.
Yeah.
But when you collect them all together over a long period of time, they're a big deal.
Yeah. And I know I'm a physical therapist by trade, and I know for us women that heart symptoms present so much differently than men. So usually what we're hearing in the media or in magazines or things like that is more the symptoms that present in men, and it does present so differently in us women.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I found out that things that I thought were just because I was getting older or, menopause, or I was out of shape compared to where I wanted to be. My husband runs marathons and my children were playing high school sports. And I thought, I know I'm the one that sort of let myself go. I'm the one that is not at peak physical condition here. So when I was the one that couldn't keep up with them in the Grand Canyon, or I was having trouble with any kind of incline or experiencing this shortness of breath, I thought, I'm out of shape and I know it, and I'm going to get it back together one of these days. But, I can look back now and see how it kind of started when my kids were much younger and I just dismissed them individually as they cropped up. But, things like inability to exercise and unusual fatigue. And I had a constant dry cough that I didn't even realize I had at the time. So there were just a lot of little things that I should have mentioned to my doctor, but because I felt like individually they were really benign, I didn't.
Yeah. I feel like as women, we so often dismiss ourselves because we're taking care of the family and we're dealing with the kids. And so we push things under the rug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is such a theme with, not only the book, but with my health and all these symptoms that I was having, because if I would have been completely honest with my doctor when he was saying, so, are you exercising? Oh yeah, I'm exercising.
Yeah.
Then he would have started to notice it, and he would have started to think, well, maybe you should try. And then I just didn't share very much in those appointments. So you couple that with the fact that it does look different in women. It just does. And that's not the first thing that doctors think about often when we have symptoms that are heart related. A lot of times it's considered to be pulmonary or something else. And so it takes a lot of self-advocating, even if you're intent on it. And I wasn't even in that mode yet. So
yeah, it's hard to find the time, right? And that busyness. So
yes.
Yeah. So do you still work for Women Heart now?
So I volunteer for them as a Women Heart champion. I'm a community educator. So I just try to get information out as all the channels that I can for women. And we just do a lot of advocating, and there's some one-on-one that we do with, virtually or on the phone with women that are just recently diagnosed with something similar to what we have. So there's a lot of just peer-to-peer relationships, and we work with that.
Yeah. So with the heart failure, I know there's heart transplants. Is that an avenue for you, or?
I've kind of been through a lot of different layers on this. I started out with the Life Vest, which is an external defibrillator vest that I wore for 9 months.
Okay.
And all this time I'm taking a lot of medication as well. And then I got an internal device I first got it in 2016. And then I got a new one in April. But right now, although last week I found out that my heart function had dropped again pretty significantly, and she started to mention, my cardiologist started to mention a transplant again. I'm still a very high functioning heart failure patient, which is good because I am high functioning, but it's also a little bit bad because that's why I pushed it under the rug for so long, is because I was still able to do so much. So they're keeping an eye on it right now. Although my heart function would qualify me for a heart transplant, the stress test that I took last week would not qualify me to be on the list quite yet. So, yeah, it's an option in the future, perhaps. And it's a really strict process because there's such a shortage of hearts that they have to be very selective.
Yeah, my dad needed a liver transplant actually, and so I have been down this road with him, and it's very hard. I mean, many years of waiting, and I know it goes based off location and organ availability, and they're like, well, if you move, and it's like, well, you're already, where are you going to go if all your family's here? I mean, you can't just up and move because you have no caregivers there to help you out, and
exactly,
it was a challenge for him for sure.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this led you to writing. So can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so obviously it was sort of born of this diagnosis and this chronic illness, but it's mostly about what happened in my faith as I was going through that, because I had been been a Christian all my life, and I really hit headfirst into needing some basic answers to some really big life questions. And I was kind of embarrassed, honestly, to be asking them at my age and, in my circumstance, that I thought I should be, completely confident and completely have all the answers at this point in my life. And I didn't feel like I did.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I just didn't ask them. And then, I got the diagnosis in early 2016. And then in 2018, I started this blog, and it started to ask some of these basic questions. And it was kind of a leap of faith because up to that point, I didn't even have social media. I was a very private person.
Yeah.
And started putting it out there. And a lot of people were reaching out and saying, I don't have heart failure. I don't have any health problem, but I'm on this other kind of detour with a child, an adult child, or a financial situation or career situation. And I relate to these questions you're asking. And so it went from there to writing some articles and being included in some anthologies. And then finally, all these things that I had been writing and all the thoughts and all the processing I had been doing came together in a book that was released earlier this year. So it's kind of been really about a 7-year process to get from, this change in my life to where it was ready to be included as part of this book. And the book is it's an essay collection. It's 40 essays that look at these life questions. And I have gotten a lot of really good feedback about that, about making them essays instead of like a long form book, which is a little bit unusual. So I kind of stepped into that, not knowing what I was doing, but it's been a good experience.
Yeah, so you can kind of, I'm reading a book right now, actually, that's an essay format. Do you know Corrie ten Boom? Have you read? Yeah, so I'm reading her. It's like after The Hiding Place. It's called Tramp for the Lord. And it's written in these short essays. And I found it has been so good for my life with my kids because I can read one of them while I'm in the pickup line at school, or I get a few minutes at soccer practice. I can read one of them. And it's so nice to read in that format. And I never thought I would enjoy it. But I'm like, here I am. Yes, love it.
Yes, yes. And another thing I realized, and I didn't know at the time, I was writing in these little short pieces because I was in this sort of trauma situation with my health. Yeah. And what I didn't realize is that when anybody has they're in a position of pain or trauma, that's how, or a busy mom like you, that's how people read, is their attention span shrinks. And so they're more apt to read in those short bursts. And that's how I was writing. So I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but as I wrote in those short ones, people were consuming them and not feeling, sometimes you start a book, or I do, and I get partway through and then life happens and it sits on my nightstand. And I feel guilty when I look at it. I think, it's a good book. I don't know why I'm not finishing it. And this book, the book that I wrote with the essays, you don't feel that way because you can jump in anywhere you want and read one, or, go back to the beginning and read the second one or whatever. And you don't feel like you dropped the ball. So that was something else that was important to me too. I didn't want to create any, extra heartache or grief or, pressure on anybody.
Yeah. It's not taking up headspace, right? Of like, yep, here it is, still in here. So I imagine I was going to ask you, like, who did you go to start asking these questions? And you went to a very public format of asking that questions. Was that scary to put yourself out there like that?
It was. And I think I was almost just numb at that point, which was very helpful because I just started tiptoeing into these questions. And I remember publishing some of them thinking, well, I don't know how people are going to think about that. Because at that time, my email list was very small and I probably knew all of them by name. And
it's like your people,
they were going to,
your people are supporting
my
you.
family. Yeah. But it was so well received because there was a lady, one in particular I remember, she had lost an adult son who was serving overseas and he died of the flu about 5 or 6 years ago. And then last spring, her youngest son died from suicide.
Oh
and
gosh.
She reached out to me and said something about it. And I just felt so unworthy to be, to hold her loss in my hands like that. But she said, everything that you're saying about loss and grief and expectations and how life is supposed to be, it applies to me. And I never would have thought of that. So I'm glad that I did step out there, but it was a hard thing to do. And I think I did it kind of, I kind of closed my eyes and just walked out there and did it. I was a little bit numb at the time and it worked out.
Yeah. And I think that's just what you have to do sometimes, right? Is people ask me like, how did you know you were ready to start the podcast? And I'm like, for me, it was just like, I just had to do it. Like I could sit here and hem and haw and, just sit here and ruminate on like what it's going to be and what it's going to be. But until I get my feet out there, I don't even know what it's going to be, right? Until I'm really starting down that path. And I think it is the scariest step to take, but it is so important just to get it going.
Yes. Yeah. When you never know. It's like when I was waiting to be an expert at something.
Yeah.
I was likely never going to write a book if I didn't take a step into feeling like I'm not an expert. I don't know how to write a book. So I'm really glad that I did that too, because I don't know if that's something that's ingrained in us in our culture or my generation or what, but I just felt like, what do I have to share? But sometimes you just do it and you don't know what you have to share until someone else says, I can relate to that.
Yeah. And I think that is the part, right, that you can tell yourself, if like I touched just one person in this adventure, like it was all worth it. Yeah. And it can be as small as that.
Oh, so true. Because nothing else. I mean, I have a file on my computer of when individual people will email me or reach back out and say, I'm doing this and what you said here mattered. And it's not a huge file, but it's a file of what matters. Not the reviews or any awards or anything like that. But when one person reaches back and says, wow, I was really hurting or I was really confused, and that made me feel like I wasn't alone, then you're like, whoa, who am I? Who am I to be doing this? This is so good.
Yeah. And speaking of that small moment from the other side, right, of when we are hurting and there is grief
Mhm.
or whatever trials we are going through, to know that there is one person out there that is going through something that you are, that allows you to be like, take a deeper breath, I think. Like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm not alone out here. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think we're all sort of looking for that anytime we read a book about anything. We're
Hmm.
kind of looking for that other person that knows where we are or understands a little bit about our story or has walked somewhere that we've walked. And so that's why I've always, even as a kid, I looked for books that had something that had to do with me, whether it was setting or character or subject, whatever it was. If there was one thing that I felt like, oh, that's me, then that's where I would go again and again. And I think we still do that as adults.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the quote I end the show with is a book comes in your life when you most need it. And I think that's so true because it no matter what, it never fails. It's whatever, I'm working through in my brain, like that character will maybe be going like maybe just a small walk on the same path, right? Not the same exact thing, but I truly believe that. Just like people come to our lives, I think books do the same thing.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. So what did you learn about yourself when you were writing this book?
Mm. I think I learned that I had so many more questions in me than I ever admitted to myself. And I think part of that is being a mom. I wasn't a great question entertainer. I
Hmm.
thought I should have the answers, and I thought the value was in the answer.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't real good at encouraging hard questions that I didn't have the answer to with my kids. And I did the same thing with myself. I just pushed those down and thought, I don't want anyone to know I have these questions or that I'm struggling with this, and I'll work it out on my own. And
Yeah.
as I started to write this book, just more and more questions came out, more and more and more and more. And I realized that was my connection to other people,
Yeah.
is that they have the same questions. And so if I had never discovered that, I wouldn't have had that connection to be able to reach people. And, and maybe we don't find the answer. And that's okay. Cause sometimes I think we just need permission to ask the question.
Yeah. I love that. Do you find now that you ask more questions? Like, has it changed you a little bit as well?
It really has. I think there was something in my health journey, and still after, 7 or 8 years, the doctors just don't know. They don't know what happened to my heart.
Yeah.
They think maybe a virus might have attacked it at some point. But, in a pre COVID world, that was kind of a weird idea. So
Yeah.
we don't really know. And I had to get used to the fact that they don't know why I have it.
Yeah.
They don't know. They're trying things to help me, but they don't know what would fix it. And it's been up and down. At one point, my heart was almost normal, and then it came
Wow.
back down again. So there's just so much unknown that it really got my attention and made me realize that I can't. The knowing part is comforting sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's not really where the value is. And it's not where most of life is lived. I think most of our life is lived in uncertainty,
Yeah.
and and that's okay. And we should entertain that, and we should just learn from it and grow from it, instead of just being so honed in on finding this singular answer
Yeah.
that we may not ever be able to find.
You're speaking so much truth there as my physical therapy brain is like pinging right now that I spent so much time, and I'm sure there's other maybe people, medical professionals listening, talking to people. They'd be like, well, I need to have an MRI to see the inside of my knee to know exactly what's happening. And I'm like, okay, but they're not going to just give you an MRI. Unfortunately, our medical system doesn't work like that. And it's not going to change the treatment, right? Like I'm still going to treat you based off how you are showing up today. So knowing exactly what's going on in the knee, I mean, unless like surgical intervention is needed, which we can assess, I'm like, it's not going to change what I'm doing today. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that and I get that. Because I'm sure if I had a diagnosis myself, you don't want to live in uncertainty. In uncertainty, that feels like a very scary place to be, right? And black and white, and like tell me what where I am, which side. But that is a hard place. But there was a lot of time we would spend on. We might never have an answer, but that we are going to treat you what we're seeing today.
Yes. Yes. Well, and part of it for me was I think if I could get to where it was black and white and where I knew the cause and effect, then I felt like I could guard my family against it. I could guard it from happening again.
You could
and
fix
I
it.
could define it. Yes. And when it was so out there and I didn't know where it came from and I didn't know how they were going to treat it, it felt like more of a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's as moms why we do that is, we're always in that protection mode, that mama bear mode.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can define the enemy, then I can protect against it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, most of the time we can't define it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very hard place to be. I totally understand that. So it sounds like for your writing process, did you compile some of the blog posts that you have done over the years, or are these new questions? How did you compile this together?
Yeah. So like I said, I started writing in these little bits and pieces, whether it was blog posts or articles. And I was just writing as I thought of the question. I didn't have like this master plan or anything. I'm like, this is bothering me today. I'm going to write about this. And when I got ready to write my book, I knew I had addressed a lot of questions, but they just came out, how they came out. And so I started putting them on sticky notes. And I have a whole wall in my office that's covered with the questions that I addressed throughout all my writing. And then they started to sort of go into these three main questions of life. And that's how I organized the book, is these three main questions, and all of them kind of fit in one of those three. So I didn't really set out to do that. But as I started processing, I guess I should take one step back, how this really started before I even said I'm going to sit down and type at my computer because I can't lecture. A friend of mine dropped a notebook by my hospital room. It's this little spiral notebook. And she said, I think she meant for me to write down like medications or something for the kids at home. And it turned into this place where when I would get up at night and they were taking my vitals, I would write down what was on my mind. Yeah. Like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why this is happening. How in the world, how long? Yeah. And then I thought, when this is resolved and I'm healthy again, I'm just going to throw that notebook away. I felt like it was kind of catharsis. I'm getting it out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have a burning party. I don't know. And then when it never went away and I realized this is a chronic disease, I just stopped writing in it. And my husband was like, you should be writing all this down. And I didn't want to, because I didn't want to ever relive it. And I was still in the mindset that this is going to be a past, we're going to get over this and we're going to look back on it. But I did. I would still get it out every once in a while and write something down. And that became part of each essay in the book. I have a little bit of a journal entry in each essay that's in the book. And if I hadn't written that down in real time, I wouldn't have that pain point. I wouldn't have that connection with the reader, really, to say, ooh, that's what I'm feeling right now. And then, having waited 5 or 6 years, I have perspective on the pain. Yeah. But I also have the exact pain moment in there. So that was helpful. I didn't want to do it, but that's kind of how it started. And then it just ended up into these 3 buckets of questions.
Yeah. Because I imagine our trauma response, right, is to kind of push everything away, right? Of like, I don't want to remember this. And so you kind of almost like black out that part. And so having these journal entries, like you said, was this real time that maybe your brain might have been trying to protect you and might not have remembered.
Yes, exactly. And I can look back at it now and I'm like, I do not remember writing it. And I certainly don't remember living it on a lot of the things that happened. So it's been a gift that and I still have the physical notebook too, because there's just, it's funny because I did have grocery lists in between
That's
some of
funny.
the journal entries and things like that.
Life
But
was happening
that was
still.
Yes, yes. Things were happening. I had a senior in high school, and so there was a lot happening that year. So I had a lot of senior picture dates and all the things were still going on.
Yeah. So, and then lastly, here about your writing, if you could go back and tell yourself something now, can tell yourself your old self, what would you tell yourself about the writing process?
Uh, I think and it speaks a lot to my personality as a child. But I would just say do it imperfectly and just do it. I would never have allowed myself to do that if I didn't feel at some point that I was almost running out of time.
Yeah.
And if I don't do it, it's never going to get done. So that feeling like I was running out of time pushed me into doing it imperfectly. But if I could tell my younger self to start
Mm.
before I had that ticking time bomb in my head, I would say step out there because there's so much to learn from doing it imperfectly, and it also just gets you started on that road like we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. It gets you going.
Hmm. Yeah. I can't even think of where I heard this, but and maybe at Bible study this week, we were talking about like getting the train rolling and how it's so much easier once it's already going versus like when we go from the stop position to the start, like that is the biggest push that you need. But if you keep it going and you just give it little pushes along the way, you're going to get that much further.
Yes, and that's a good point too, is to just kind of start small. You don't have to do it all in the
Yeah.
first step. Just a little push. Like, I just started doing blog posts because I was tired of doing individual texts to people about my health updates.
Yeah.
And then that became something else, and then that became something bigger. But if I had been in the hospital and said, I'm going to write a book, I would have said, whoa, no.
Yeah. Not happening.
Yeah.
Okay. And then let's switch gears a little bit and talk about who you are as a reader. Have you always been a reader?
Absolutely. I was thinking about my kids loved the summer reading programs at our library, but I grew up when there were no summer reading programs. The library was just a place that held books. And
Yeah.
I just remember so much being in there. And that was really defined my summers because you had this freedom to go in there in the summer months and pick up whatever you wanted
Yeah.
and read whatever you wanted. And there was just something such a privilege about that and being able to pick that book. And I have such warm feelings about the small town library where I grew up because they've moved since then, but it was a magical place, even though all it was just shelves of books.
Yeah.
There were no toys. There wasn't really even a children's section so much as just a couple of shelves, but it was really, really special.
Yeah. I actually was just talking about like my library experiences as a child as well. And that was my almost exact memory of like the wonder, no matter what age, of walking in because just you knew you were going to get a book and you were going to get transported to another world. And the moment you're walking through that door of the library, there's so much promise that this is going to be there. And it's, it kind of keeps that childhood wonder going. And I've thought about that. I'm like, I still think I get that. Like I go have my big old long to be read list on my phone and I just put it in alphabetical order. And then I go to the fiction stacks and I start with whether I want to go A or Z and I find whatever they have available. So I don't really know what I'm going to get going in, but I have my big old, 500 plus books on my to be read list. So I know I'll find something.
Oh, that's great. Yes, I love that. There is just something special about that because you're right. Everything's a possibility when you walk in, and
Yeah.
there's nobody telling you this is what you have to read or you have to do this with it. And even as a kid, it's just so much, even the card, like we had a physical card at the time, and it just felt like they're trusting me with somebody's book.
Yeah. Speaking of the cards, I thought you were going to talk about the one that they would stamp that was like in the front of the book. So we just went to the Central Library here in San Diego. I mean, this was maybe 6 months ago, and we got this book, and it was an older book, but it was a children's, like classic children's book, and they had that card in there. My kids were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a relic right there. That is an old library card." It's like teaching moment
Oh.
here. It was so funny because they had just never seen that before because they all have the
No.
barcodes in them now. So
Right. Yes. Yes. Little
just,
date stamp on it.
yeah,
Yep.
that was so fun. You'd hear the little click thing and you're like, okay, I got this for this amount of time. They don't know that at all. Okay. And then what kind of books do you like to read?
Mm. I am a nonfiction person. I love anything that has personal narrative in it, whether
Okay.
that's essays or memoir or just, anything like that where it's a real person telling a story from their life. I'm a sucker for those.
Yeah. And exactly what you were saying is you can maybe someone else's life experiences are similar to yours, or you can walk that same path with someone else. And so I could see
Mhm.
where those would reflect your personality.
Yeah, yeah. And on the flip side of that, like sometimes I like to pick up one where it's unlike anything I would ever experience.
Yeah.
And I get to be somebody else in their real life. And that, to me, because it makes you more empathetic when
Yeah.
you're not, you'll never cross paths with this person, but except for in their book.
Yeah.
That kind of opens your eyes up a little bit to the world. So I love doing that too.
I love that part as well. Well, you've been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us today. Can you tell us how they pair together?
Yes. Well, okay. The first book I have is an essay collection, as you might guess. And I have several books of this author, and almost all of them are essay collections. And this one is called Buechner 101, and it is by Frederick Buechner, and it's just a collection of essays.
Okay.
And I think his tone and voice in there and his authenticity and the way he really vulnerably asked questions was when I first got the idea
Okay.
that I can do that. I can ask questions. And so, really, his voice and the format were very influential over the book that I wrote. So, I have a special place, like physically on my shelf. I have a special place for all of his books.
That's wonderful. I've never heard of this, so I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, I think it was this calendar year, he passed away, but so he has some fiction. He's written everything, but he's wonderful. So
Okay.
good.
All right. So that was Buechner 101 by Frederick
Hmm.
Buechner. What's the second
Yes.
book of the pairing today?
Okay, the second book is actually a children's book, and
Yay.
it's one that we had for our kids and we read to them, and now my kids are gone. And I'm honestly telling you that sometimes I get this book out and read it for myself still, because I think, as any really good children's book
Yes.
does, there's a message for the parents in
Yep.
there as well as for the child. And this one is called You Are Special by Max Lucado,
Okay.
and a very classic children's book, but it speaks to your self-worth and your value and how other people treat you and how that affects what you think about yourself. So I find that I need to reread it all the time, but I love it and my kids loved it, and obviously they're all grown up, but I still read it to myself.
Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful book because those are messages we need to hear. A
Yeah,
lot.
maybe sometimes more as an adult, you know? I mean, I think we still run into imposter syndrome and just feeling like we don't belong even as an adult.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I always tell, like, I have friends that will ask me, like, oh, what books are you reading about the kids? And I was like, well, number one, you should enjoy the book too. Like, don't be suffering through, especially when you get into the chapter books, right? It's like, don't suffer through a book that you can't stand either. Like, it should be a book for all of, like you said, good quality children's literature, like, has a message for us adults too.
Yes, yes.
So is this a
Totally
picture
agree.
book? I haven't seen this one either.
It
I've heard of the
is,
author, but
yeah, it's a picture book,
okay.
but it's one of those that has, probably uh 50 words on a page or
Okay.
something.
All right.
And I saw that they also made it into a board book, which was greatly shrunk down, but the original version has a story in there, and it's probably, I mean, probably for you probably need to be about 4 or 5 to 8,
Okay.
something.
I was
Sweet
actually
spot.
thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll add this on my kids' Christmas list. They're 3, 5, and 8. So they're like right in
There
that
you
realm.
go. Yeah.
So,
Perfect.
well, thank you so much for sharing that one. So, You Are Special by Max Lucado was the second book. And then what's the third book of the pairing today?
Oh, the third one is a medical memoir that it's heart related, but it's a different heart affliction than what I have, and it's The Last Ordinary Hour by Kathy Izzard.
Okay.
And that one is really gave me the idea that you can take something that's happened to you very specifically like that and make it apply to a wider audience and make the experiences and lessons and things that you went through apply to somebody that's beyond the story that you're living. And so I love that one because it was very vulnerable. It was very it's just a book that's written from beginning to end. It's not essays, but it is a book that really draws the reader in, and you can find yourself in that story, even though Kathy's husband had a very rare heart disease.
Yeah.
And probably most readers have never even heard of it, but definitely there's things in there. And just her example of sharing that and what she was thinking helped me to realize what my husband must have been thinking when I had my first diagnosis. And so that was helpful for me. I really love that book.
Yeah. And like you said, it gives you that dual perspective too of the closest person in your life, right? Your husband and what he might be experiencing. And Kathy, listeners, Kathy came on, it's episode 37. She came on and talked a little bit about this. And I can't remember if she was the one that talked about this, but when they got to sit down and talk about their two different experiences that they lived together, like they had two totally different narratives because one was, the person going through it and the other one was the caregiver. And just, and I can't, again, I apologize, Kathy, that I can't remember if it was your episode, but someone has come on the show and talked about how their narratives were so different around the same event.
Yeah, I could see how that would happen because you're running it through, completely different filters and you're seeing it from a different perspective. So just her sharing that, I think I was a lot more empathetic to what my husband was going through, because when you're the one that's having the medical issue, it's so easy to just focus on yourself because everything's focused on you, that it's helped for me to really look at how it's affect not only my husband, but my children and friends and things like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these. So that was The Last Ordinary Hour by Kathy Izzard. So how I love to end our show is with our bonus pairings, and that's just a speed round of questions here. So I'll ask these really quick. Where is your favorite place to read?
Oh, I still love to read print. So I love to be outside. I love to be, when it's in the winter, I have a spot upstairs that I love to read, but it has to be somewhere where I can hold the book in my hand and just There's just some physical connection that I have with books. I can't describe it, but
Yes. Oh, I love that. And then what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
ooh. Well, this goes back to another children's book from when I was really little. There was a book, The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by
Mhm.
Beatrix Potter. And I checked it out from that same library we were just talking about. And the short version of the story is that I checked it out during the summer, and we were wheat farmers. And so
Okay.
we had a truck that we only used during wheat harvest. And without realizing it, I put it in the glove box of that truck,
Oh no.
and I didn't remember putting it in there. And I was not able to return that book on time. And we went to church with the librarian, and we couldn't find the book.
Oh
We
no.
turned the house upside down. I felt terrible. My
Yep.
mom felt terrible. And she would ask us about it every week at church. We had no idea where the book was. And finally, my mom paid for the book. And then the next year, when we got ready to harvest again, we got the truck out, we found it.
Oh my goodness.
And so every time I see that book, I think about all the feelings that went into that, feeling like I failed because they entrusted me with that book and I lost
Yes.
it, and my mom had to pay for it. But kind of the bookend of that is a couple months ago, I was able to go back to the library. It was a different librarian by now, but I was able to donate my own book to that library. And
There you
so it kind
go.
of felt like it came full circle a little bit.
Yeah, I actually had a similar tale. We're a military family. And so when we were getting ready to move we only had our oldest at that time, but I was still working full time. And somehow a library book got packed up in our shipment that was moving to Italy. So I didn't see it. It took, it's 3 to 4 months before you see your things and, except the stuff that you leave behind for suitcases. And so I remember having to go we were living in Norfolk at the time. And I remember going to Norfolk and being like, I am so sorry, but I lost this book. Can I just pay for it? Like, I'm pretty sure it is on a shipment on its way to Italy. Like, there's nothing I can do about it at this point. And so I paid for it. And then sure enough, it came out of the box. But I'm like, well, at this point I paid for it, so we'll just keep it. Like, but I felt that guilt of like, and I was an adult, but I was like, oh my goodness. And the craziness of moving, I forgot to pull it out. So but yeah,
Love it.
similar story. So are you a rereader?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. And that's why I love, short form like essays, because I love to go back and reread it. A lot of times when I go back and reread just a long book, I will just read bits and pieces of it anyway, stuff I've underlined or stuff I've turned back the page on. But I love rereading.
Yeah.
It's like visiting an old friend,
Yeah. That comfort zone.
Yes.
And then lastly, what are you reading next?
The next one that I'm reading is a book that's coming out. It's a debut author, and it's called Busting Barriers by Dr. Gladys Childs.
Oh yeah.
And I love, a lot of people will be like, oh, it's a debut book. I don't know. I don't know if it'll be any good, but I love reading first books by authors because a lot of us, like we talked about, have a book inside of us. And so we're piling up all our lives, all this goodness. And then when the first book comes out, the author will put in there all this stuff they've been marinating on throughout their whole life. And you get the very cream of that.
I love that. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, because they don't know if they're ever going to write another book. So they're like, I got to put all the very best stuff in this book, in this first one. And so I always am drawn to first books because I feel like that's where they're like giving it all they got and just really laying it on the table. So I look forward to that one. But that one's going to be an exciting one because it's about living out the fruits of the Spirit and how we can do that and what keeps us from doing that. So,
well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all that you've given me.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I love it. I love the questions, and you're easy to talk to.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Lori Ann Wood and her book flight of personal narrative essay books. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.